Hildreth is a designer at the MIT Media Lab, focused primarily on the strategy and integration of inclusive co-design methodologies for the director's office, and as the director of Plus Minus, which she'll go into in her presentation. She's exploring how to recast the technology design process to more equitably and intentionally distribute positive impact, especially with and for society's most marginalized. The title of Hildreth's talk is Beyond Resilience, Design Strategies for Our Preferred Food Futures. Welcome, Hildreth, to the Food Forum.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. I am excited to follow Pradeep and Philippe on some design strategies for transforming our food system. Here are my disclosures. I am a designer at the Media Lab, which is funded by more than 80 member companies with a range of business models and disciplines. I'm a former employee of the Open Agriculture Initiative, and I'm the owner and founder of Hestia Design Lab and Cersano Nutrition. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about four things. I will tell you why thinking like an artist and a designer might be the secret sauce to transforming the food system. I'll explain why inclusive co-design strategies optimize the food system for all the people in it and provide an opportunity to come back stronger after crisis. I'll run through some examples of folks that I think are using design to make an impact in some of the pathways that Pradeep mentioned, and I'll share a few co-design principles that are based on research at the lab that you can take away and play with. But first, I wanted to start with a story. It is May 2012, and I am standing in an ice cold Texas conference room sharing wireframes with colleagues from different departments. And my job that morning was to explain a key user insight and ask for some more time to organize an observation session to get the design just right. And a coworker, arms folded, confused, brow furrowed, uttered 6 life-changing words for me. Why do they need good design? They as in different, other, they as in not us, good design as in special or reserved for people who deserve or recognize it, as in not for everyone, a nice to have, not a need to have. The they that my colleague was referring to were the hundreds of thousands of moms we both served every month with the Texas WIC program. And many of you are familiar with WIC. It's a special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, and it helps families get nutrition and education during pregnancy and early childhood. And the good design she was referring to was for a shopping app that I was doing some user experience research for, which I hoped would untangle the messy WIC shopping experience. Now, I wasn't trained as a UX designer or as any kind of designer at that point. At that point, my only formal education was in diplomacy and nutrition. And so I knew culture and I knew food and health. And I'm a creative. I'd worked for small branding, marketing agencies, and have been a performing artist for years. But I was tasked with improving WIC's digital engagement by overhauling our website and developing WIC's first suite of mobile apps. And in 2012, the organization was new to this, and I was new to this. So I had to learn quickly on the job. And I did what I always do, which was to throw myself at every resource I could find. I was inspired by the history of socially responsible design from the 60s. I read everything I could on the work of Georgi Kepesh and Lajla Moholy-Nagy at the Center for Advanced Studies at MIT, not knowing I would end up there a few years later. Making design choices with the people I was designing for became an obsession. So original Scandinavian methods of cooperative design and Don Norman's work on human-centered design became critical reading. After all this discovery, it seemed crucial to me that good design was a collective good. We all needed the best design because it makes us pause. It surprises and delights us. It gives us curiosity, feelings like we're a child in awe. And all those emotions were critical, not only for WIC moms in a grocery store, deciding which beans to buy, but to the staff counseling them in person in crowded, dusty spaces, to the store managers trying to share their data with WIC in a new system, or the farmers trying to set up a POS at the farmers market so that they could sell their products to WIC clients. Okay, so you're probably asking yourself, why are we talking about art and design? Because we're at the NASEM Food Forum and you are from MIT, to which I answer, you are not wrong. We are talking art and design at the NASEM Food Forum. And I want to come back to those 6 words from my story, tweak, and try to answer it, which is we all respond to need and deserve good design. whether we're designers or artists or scientists or engineers or farm laborers, packaging experts, truck drivers, convenience store owners, meat processors, or consumers. And as to why someone from MIT is talking about art and design, I am from the Media Lab, which was started in 1985, and it's what I personally affectionately refer to as the punks of the East Campus at MIT. We are a research institute and a degree granting graduate program. We grant a degree called the Media Arts and Sciences degree. The Media Lab mixes science and engineering prowess of MIT with art and design, and research is often as likely to end up on display at MoMA or the Venice Biennial as it is to be published in IEEE or presented at CHI. And as an artist, nutritionist, designer, and diplomat, I'm not alone in my polymathery at the lab, and I see the benefit of crossing the streams frequently. That's because bioengineers from a group called Sculpting Evolution can often rub now virtual shoulders with a group called Opera of the Future, and it not only makes for some pretty interesting conversations at the office Christmas party, it encourages exploration of research spaces that build and play off many disciplines, like space and social justice, civics and AI, robotics and education. Neri Oxman, a computer scientist, architect, and artist who leads the mediated matter group at the lab, presented this compass or a gyroscope or a map in the inaugural issue of the Journal of Design Science. And it's based on similar mappings of creativity and innovation from John Maeda and Rich Gold. So this is the compass that's going to guide our discussion about infusing art and design into the food system, because Oxman, like many others at the lab, myself included, view the output of creative energy, which she calls CREATP, as a result of the fluid movement from one realm into another. So I want us to take a moment and note where culture and behavior are located in our Krebs cycle of creativity. I'm suggesting we scoot a little counterclockwise and take the weight off of science and engineering and integrate art and design a little more and a little more regularly into our transformation practice. As a former Media Lab director once said, you can't change culture by winning an argument. You change culture by changing hearts and minds. You can consider art and design the heart of food system transformation and that they are critical. Now, I'm a little biased because I come from an artistic family. I'm lucky enough to be classically trained as a ballet dancer, but I've been a director and a performer in theater for years. And I think of artists as simply dialogists and translators of the spectrum of human experience who are particularly keen to listen for the emotions behind people's behavior and then tell stories that surface those emotions and that resonate, weavers of emotionally compelling fabric, as Lajla Moholy-Nagy says. So from art, let's rotate down to design and note that we've moved into the production area of this quadrant. This is towards utility. Pradeep spoke about behavior change. And behavior change is a science and an art. And I'm actually not going to cover the science of behavior change. I recommend reading up on BJ Fogg or Daniel Kahneman for some basics on the science of behavior change and the art of it. But in short, it's about emotions like desire that prompts us, humans, people, to act. Knowledge certainly helps, but it's emotion that carries us through. And the transformation of an entire food system is going to require collective action. One might say a shift in culture from many people across many points in the supply chain. To design is to listen deeply to those emotions using an artist's perception and stories and produce tools and environments that shift culture, which can then inform the science, engineering, and knowledge needed to complete one cycle of creative energy. After all, culture is really just a collection of behaviors that scale, shifted by creative perception and production. And tiny habits are prompted by nature and nurture. They become ingrained into norms. Bourdieu calls this culture our habitus. It's a socially constituted system of cognitive and motivating structures. To transform the habitus of the food system, every piece of it will require a shift in motivating structures, the creation of new habits at scale that mold themselves into culture. So, at NASEM, I'll ask the question, how might we approach the food system as an artist and a designer, expand the EQ and use radically inclusive design principles to transform it? Now, by affective, I mean giving meaning or listening to underlining experiences of feeling. A design strategy that weaves emotional resonance into the supply chain optimizes for the people at the center of it and helps us tap into the wealth of creative energy that builds tools and environments to shift the entire system. And it's especially important in the parts of the system that aren't as sexy to design for in the supply chain, like logistics. And I'm apologizing in advance to Robin Metcalf for that statement. Because we have a highly effective global system with copious amounts of tools and technologies that have been designed to revolutionize how we grow, ship, sell, and consume food. They increase our efficiencies, standardize processes, and technically improve access. Many of these things MIT's had something to do with. But a design strategy for food system transformation is a yes and scenario so that we're optimizing for products and people. By involving more people in the transformation, that means we're creating a food culture that's not only effective, but more just, sustainable, and equitably beneficial. I hear you. Great. You're asking a bunch of scientists and engineers to become artists and designers, create a strategy to change behavior at scale through emotion and design. But what exactly is it that we are designing? First, let me go back to my WIC moms for a second. It mattered how WIC moms felt about the mobile apps and websites that we were creating for them to use, and it mattered that we understood the very difficult context in which they were supposed to use those tools. Those contexts provoke and provide barriers to action because they elicit emotions too, regardless of how good the tool is. So, designing for people requires strategy about both things, tools, and context. Second, technology is just one of the many tools that can change behavior. Don't tell MIT that I said this. And then third, remember that we're focusing on the people. A design strategy to design anything, processes, products, contexts, and technology, starts from the people and works outward. And this results in a food system that makes people feel heard, seen, and have agency, not only through tools and outputs, but also about addressing the total system in which they're expected to act every day. And the tech doesn't have to be the focus of the design strategy, the people do. We're designing for behavior change across as many tools and contexts as there are in the food supply chain. In US agriculture, the average age of a farmer is 58 years old. And Pradeep mentioned that we do need more farmers. So at OpenAg, I was doing research on how to make kids think more about becoming farmers and how to make open source controlled environment agriculture tech more meaningful emotionally. So I directed a small study on what impact this technology and the support for it might have on KSAs in food and ag and middle-aged school children. We also looked at the impact of the tech and the support in project-based STEM curricula for their educators in various learning contexts, so in schools, museums, and libraries. And it turns out small design decisions, many of which were teacher or student designs, tweaked the food technology and the support to become more personal, collaborative, and easy to use, and that had an impact on the feelings of confidence, self-efficacy, and curiosity using the tool, even if the tools are imperfect. Okay, yes. Okay, so we're using a design strategy to build an affective system by optimizing for people. Great. Let's design tools, contexts all across the supply chain so we can change behavior at scale. This is awesome. And this is where I'll tell you to pause. Before you suit up in your shiny new all black designer armor to save the world, I'm going to ask you this. What about the people who are already designing innovative ideas with what little resources they have, who know their environment so well? After we've given our new good designs to these folks and they're out in the world, what is our job as designers to measure our impact or identify where we might have unintentionally made a choice that disproportionately brings negative impact on a community that might already be marginalized? I founded Plus Minus in 2019 to try to answer these questions in design, particularly tech design, weighing the pros and cons of our work as we're in the process. I want to recast the design process and design culture in the lab to focus on co-creation, especially with marginalized communities, so that the benefits of the lab's work can be more equally distributed at scale. Bringing non-researchers into the lab as equals in the design process strikes a delicate balance between consequentialism and social justice, between rigorous academic expertise and lived experience, and hubris and humility. Because equal opportunity is not the same thing as equal impact. And I don't think I'm revealing anything to anyone on this call when I say we're dealing with the repercussions of a food system built on existing inequities and injustices. Co-design asks the designer to examine their role in perpetuating those injustices. And it's a method of design that asks you to not only use your design resources to create more equitable tools in an equitable way, but then to measure your impact, add reflection to your practice, and make sure that you understand whether you're leaving the system in a more just place than when you arrived. Co design offers the opportunity for designers to step back and acknowledge the privilege of even being in a position to fix, make other people aware of their ownership and solutions, and build and play off using multi layered expertise and experience. In a way, co design is the most media lab type of design process. It's teaching and learning how to fish at the same time. It's also a tool that can be used for building social resilience. I think of resilience as a rubber band bouncing back, and resilience is typically defined as the ability to return to a functional state rather than breaking when stressed. But let's think about co design as a slingshot for resilience. It helps us consider and design for what comes after crisis. How do we design tools and environments now with communities that are impacted, build up their creative strengths to not only rise to the next challenge without intervention, but benefit from the stress being placed on the system? Co design also honors the plurality of knowing and creating and embeds co creative processes into our habitus, those cognitive and motivating structures that go beyond design's extractive use in business as usual. Helfand says that design builds balance, and there's a massive creative potential in this unique pause that early 2020 has provided us. It's giving us an opportunity to rethink how we design. As we talk about using design to shift food cultures and using co design to nudge people and systems towards more just, co design is a process in and of itself, a culture shift. And as we're taking stock of what's been missing in our food system, it also draws on the strengths that we haven't used yet and then take collective aim at reshaping a food culture that's more equitably beneficial for the people in it and more sustainable for the planet that feeds us. So I want to get into the real world. These are some folks that I think are doing what we've just described in their work in transforming the food system. And then I'm going to lay out a few design principles to help you as you continue in your transition work. So the Better Buying Lab at the World Resources Institute just released this playbook for guiding designers in January of 2020. And I love that it's a behavior change strategy model. I particularly want to point out that they include behavior change strategies for the chefs and food service employees. And this is essentially bringing focus from the consumers in behavior change backwards along the supply chain. Another good example of someone who puts people at the center of their food journey is in it. They use an interesting food environment choice architecture model that brings CPGs, retailers, and home appliance manufacturers together in one platform. They're shifting behaviors backwards, again, along the supply chain, particularly towards transparency, collaboration, sharing, and integration across a variety of pathways and environments. But they start with people. A lot of you are familiar with IDEO. It's a design firm and the Rockefeller Foundation who is working with IDEO in this Food Vision Prize. But the Rockefeller Foundation's been working with IDEO for the last few years to design place-based, people-centered interventions in the food system. For example, bringing the World Wildlife Fund and hotels together to help redesign all-you-can-eat culture and the impact that has on food waste. The Food Vision Prize is just another example of their work. And they're doing this in partnership with Open IDEO, which is emphasizing that anyone can help design solution across challenges in our food system. And then finally, I'll bring us to IKEA and Space 10. Space 10 is IKEA's in-house research and innovation design lab. And with IKEA's massive global supply chain impact, they've invested in integrating design and specifically co-design approaches to exploring a more just, sustainable food and food environment solution. So now I'm just going to briefly cover some principles you can take away to use this theory in practice. The first one is this question. Ask this question of yourself. Can people play with your designs? And by play, I mean let your co-designers breathe. As you're co-designing, are you leaving space for cow paths or design lines? And these are the little paths across the grass where people cut corners in a design space because it's faster or it's easier. Are you just building in room for localized, adaptable choices without over-reliance on global expectations and standards? And is there space for sometimes beautiful human error, a stochasticity of designs evolving over time? This is based on Sandy Pentland's work at the lab on building modular, heterogeneous, decentralized systems that can bounce back more quickly in times of crisis, and Pip Mothersill's beautiful designer tool work, helping designers use orthogonal adaptable approaches and tools that create purposeful ambiguity and intentional serendipity. This is a pretty simple one. I'm actually not going to explain much, but this is a question that needs to be part of your design process. And if everyone started with this question, we've already begun a culture shift. And then finally, does it need to be new and does it need to be you? This goes back to the co-designer's role of stepping back. Would putting design resources towards the maintenance of an older or um, adjustment to an old way be enough? And do you need to be the one with the solution? Erica Hall, who's of Mule Design, says that for Design 101, you must establish the incentives for believing new information or doing new things. And more importantly, understand the reasons for the current beliefs or old ways before you introduce anything new. So I want to close here simply by saying there's some theories, some examples, and some principles to explore why art and design are critical components of creating, as Chris says, a resilient, just food system across domains. And I want to thank you for your time and for the invitation to be here.
Thank you, Hildreth. Thank you for introducing us to how design is important to this whole process. And I'd like to follow up with a question, building off the Food System Vision Prize, which you mentioned. As Naomi mentioned, I'm a modeler by training, and I was involved in an application which wasn't successful, as most of them weren't, because many people applied. And it was really tough to try to develop a vision. And for those who aren't familiar with the vision, what it's asked is for groups to develop a vision that's anchored in a place that is both regenerative and nourishing of the food system. And it's hard to wrap one's own mind around it. Once you've done that in any, and this could be in a research setting apart from the Food System Vision Prize, how do you bring in other people without turning them off, without making them think that you already have all the answers, so that they feel like they have room to offer their own perspective?
That's a great question. This is actually a question about facilitation. One of the things that the design process sets up is a power dynamic in the room, right? In the dialogue between who has solutions and who does not, or who's there simply to provide their information. It's a sort of it can be a very extractive process, and historically it's been very extractive. Interestingly, cooperative design or co-design that started in Sweden was done with designing workspaces for graphic artists, and the artists themselves were brought into the design process early on because it was the designers themselves who actually didn't know anything about the process, but they'd been tasked with designing a station for them. So in addressing how to get people in and how to make them feel comfortable, it actually becomes a question of the literal wording and the invitation of bringing people to the table. And then the role of the designer is to facilitate the conversation and step back, to capture as much as possible, but to also then increase the feelings of confidence and self-efficacy of the people who are at the table creating the solutions. And in fact, sometimes what that means is walking away as the designer and allowing the owners of those solutions to take the project forward. And that's what I mean about, does it have to be you with that as a design principle? Because it doesn't always need to be the designer who's coming up with the solution. And that coming up with the solution could be even deploying it. It simply means facilitating the discussion and the dialogue to get at why the solution is needed in the first place, and then allow the people who know their environment so well to be major actors in the process.
Great, thank you.